Hello. I had an interesting morning this morning with people who design music and sound effects for computer games, but that's slightly off topic. This tutorial is about something very basic, but nevertheless not trivial, and it's about textures and textures and textures. What you can see here is basically the red objects and the green, black, white objects are a checker texture, which you might have encountered before in Maya. It's a checker, so this one and this one. A very simple procedural texture, as it's called, because it can be described mathematically very simply, which doesn't make it bad in any way. It makes it even more elegant than other non-procedural textures. Okay, this is a checkerboard. Red, this complex thing, red, this complex thing, etc. It repeats all over the half or three-quarter torus. Within the area which are not red, you have subdivisions like another checkerboard system, here the green one, and apart from the green one is the black and white one. So it's a texture in a texture in a texture in a texture, so to say. It can be built very simply, and I just show you the hierarchy and then I show you the hypershader. Okay, let's go to the NURBS torus. That's the object here, and here I have the standard shader. I used an Arnold shader for this. Up here in the color is some strange color which doesn't turn up in the scene. It's because the checkerboard here, which doesn't have to do anything with the checkerboard here, it just means a mapping, because that icon is replaced by this black arrow. If we click on it, we see checker, place 2D texture, and checker 2. So the checker 1 is this one. It is red, and the red is just a red, and the green is just a fake color because here's another arrow. So when we go here, we come to the green and gray one, and the gray one is another fake color because that's mapped again with black and white. So here the whole hierarchy ends. This checker 3, as it's called, is this thing here. That's a checker 3. If we go back here, that's the checker 2. The checker 2 is this area here. And if we go back here, we come to the checker 1. It's that set, these 4. That's what makes up the checkerboard here, the first one. So if we go to, say, that green-gray one, and the green hasn't been mapped yet, we can map that as well. Let's do this. I click on the checkerboard. So keep in mind, we have green here. This green will disappear in a second. We map the green now with a checker. So the checker is here, but we don't see it. Why don't we see it? Because we need to place it very densely, and that's done with the place 2D texture. And the original placement is 4 by 4. That's the default. That's how we started. So that section here, texture number 1, the checker number 1, is 4 by 4. The next one in here is 8 by 8. I typed in the numbers 8 and 8 here, and the smaller ones are 16 by 16. So let's type in 16 by 16 now. And here you can see the new icons appear. Now we want to distinguish them from the other ones. That's why we give them other colors. For example, instead of the white, what color didn't we have? Well, we can choose a blue. So this is turning blue now, and we can change the black here to, say, very light blue, like this. Now we have this complex checkerboard system with 4 embedded textures. Texture in texture in texture and in texture. We could of course do the same thing here with a red. We could also change things like, for example, if we want to change the red to a ramp. Let's go back here to checker number 1. This is our red in the checker number 1. We click here and we create a ramp. Now the red is gone and we have a ramp working here, and instead of a V ramp we can choose a U ramp. That depends on the on how it's mapped on this thing, but basically we need to do something here. Let's type in 4 by 4 here, and now we see the ramp working. Okay, so instead of, let's revert this, let's undo this, undo until we have the red again. Okay, now I show you the scene, which this is the viewport here, the perspective camera, not the rendered view. I will show you the appearance in the Hypershade. And the Hypershade, for you listeners and watchers of this video who are not familiar with it, the Hypershade is the central point to create textures and to modify textures. So let's go to Windows, and since it has to do with the appearance of objects, it has to sit in the rendering section. So under Windows rendering editors you find the Hypershade. It's right here, and it shows you this thing in this representation. That's a typical thing for the Hypershade. I think it's new in Maya 2000. It was new in Maya 2017. But you don't see anything here. Press Tab to create a node. We don't want to create a node now because we have lots of nodes here. And instead we'll pick this object and then we click here. That gives us the input and output connections of this thing here. That's the standard surface shader. Now if we select it and click here again, we see the whole hierarchy. It's right here. And what we see here on the very right side is the AI standard surface shading group. That's what we actually see and what is rendered. This is the complex shader, the standard surface shader. That's the shader we always have to deal with. In this window, like in most other windows in Maya, you can navigate with the usual Alt key and mouse movements. So I can zoom in here, for example. This is the checkerboard, which sends its out color to the base color of this object, in our case the torus. So if we disconnect this by clicking it, activating it and pressing delete, this goes to a blank color. We can reconnect it by out color to base color. Now we're back here. That's how this works. You might find it interesting when you look closer that you have a plus here and a plus here. So when you open this, we see the colors red, green and blue, and the same here. So we could map, actually, let's delete this again. We could map the red of our checker ramp, lots of red, to say the base color, which doesn't work, see? Because it's only one parameter and you can only attach it to a single parameter, like the color red here, for example, which gives us this notion, because the green and blue channels are ignored now. So this is the basic way to connect things in this editor, in the Hypershade editor. Let's pick the out color of the checker 1 and put it into the base color, so we're back here. Now in the hierarchy we have, let's ignore the place 2D textures for now. They are the ones where we decide how many of them we want there. Let's just concentrate on the 4 checkers we have. The checker number 1 is the first checker we have, which is giving us the overview, which used to be black and white, a very rough outline, like this. This is the checker number 1. The checker number 3 and 4, they both send their out colors to the input of checker number 2, because one of the colors in checker number 2 is mapped by checker number 3 and the other one by checker number 4. And these are the place nodes here. So if you are not sure about the placement of, say, texture number 3, you just click on it and it's here in the attribute editor. It's currently set to 16 by 16. If we set it to, say, 20 by 20, this is what we get. So here you can easily select the things and make adjustments. A final thing, if we want to use other input nodes here, for example, you have here the emission. We have the out alpha, maybe from Photoshop or other programs. You're familiar with out alpha. If you have a black and white object, you have a black and white alpha. And if you have a green and blue and red picture, for example, you have lots of gray tone alpha values. So alpha is a monochrome parameter which we can input into monochrome parameters here, like the emission. It tells us emit more or less light. So we cannot put in RGB colors here, but we can put an alpha channel in here. So the emission goes in here now, and all of a sudden this thing brightens up. So let's see what's happening here in the rendering. We lose all our fine textures in that white. We see actually the mapping of the first checker texture. That's checker number 1 at work now. But they are still here, but they don't work anymore because we override them with the emission. What kind of emission, you might ask? Well, let's go to Arnold Utilities Light Manager. And in the Light Manager, I see I have only one light, that's a sky dome light. And if I reduce this from 1 point something to 0, I see the light working. So these things are shining and they are reflecting on the ground and they are creating a light of their own. That's something I only did by putting in the alpha channel of the checker 1 into the emission node of the standard Arnold shader. Have a nice day.